Hey guys, what's going on? It's Alex over at Laser Everything, and to follow up last week's episode on Affinity Designer, I really wanted to spend some time also talking about Inkscape. Inkscape is another vector editing suite, and it is absolutely 100% free to use. There are some trade-offs for that. The user interface isn't quite as friendly, but it's still a really powerful piece of software, and it includes a ton of features that are lacking on Affinity Designer. So whether you want to use this to supplement what Affinity Designer doesn't offer, or you want to use this as your entire vector editing solution, we're going to cover everything you need to know how to use this piece of software with your laser machine step by step, just like we always do. And don't go anywhere because we're getting started right now. Alright guys, another day, another vector editing suite. So here we are in Inkscape, and we're going to start by setting up a brand new document. I've just kind of created a generic one here. I want to show you some of the document customizations. So if we come into File, and we head down to Document Properties, here we're going to get just a basic list of some of our documents set up. You can set the border color, the desk color that's back here, and the color of the page. I like setting the page to just slightly off-white. That way we can monitor if we have any white pieces that we need to get rid of for our laser software. So not like white, not gray, but you know, just somewhere kind of off-white. We'll make it really easy to make sure that our vectors are actually transparent when we're working with them. Another thing I like to customize, we're in inches, 5x3, just like we do in every other vector editing software tutorial. And outside of that, you know, we don't really need to mess with too much in here. You can save this as a template if you want to, so you can close this and we can come up to File, and down here we've got Save Template, which is super easy. You go ahead and give it a name and a description if you want, and you can also save it as the default template. That way this opens every time that you open Inkscape. Another thing we need to do before we get too far into this is we need to set an export setting. So if we come down to Preferences, we can come in here and there's a ton, I mean just a ton of customizations in here that you can make to how things are set up. But what we really want is this input output here, and we're looking at SVG Export. These are all checked for me, and then we've got SVG output. And for SVG output, the only real thing that we need to pay attention to here is our path string format. We want this set to relative, okay? I don't think it matters so much if this is for Lightburn and you're using this for Lightburn, but definitely for Ezcad users, we want to make sure this is set to relative. So go ahead and make sure that that is selected, and then we can close this as well. So we're ready to get started here, and we're going to run through all of the same basic things that we do in our other vector editing kind of 101 videos. So the very first thing we're going to do is mess around with some text. So we're just going to grab the text tool, and we'll come in and click, and we can go ahead and create some basic text, maybe laser everything, and you can hit Control A to select all of that text. Up here we've got our font selections. Font selections are fairly straightforward, so you can just go ahead and click whatever you want to click there, and that's going to come right up. This is laser everything, so let's stick with our Futura and bold. So we've got our modifiers up here, so if you have, you know, italics or obliques, you can come in and select those right there, fairly straightforward. And just like with any of our vector editing software, we need to make sure that we convert this text into an object. We'll do that in Inkscape by coming up to Path and then Object to Path, and there it is right there. There's a few ways we can make sure that we did that successfully. One is double clicking the text. If we double click, we should be able to select individual letters with the node editing tool. That's this selector right here. So when we go in and click each of these, it should show up as nodes, so we definitely don't want to be double clicking and having it enter the text editor, right? If that's the case, then we didn't expand this properly. The other way we can check is we can come up to layer, and we're just going to click layers and objects, and that's going to open this layer and objects panel right over here on the right side, and here we can see our text has been converted to paths. So again, very straightforward. It's not that complicated. Just to show you the difference, I'll go ahead and create another bit of text here. So we can do laser everything. There we go, just like that. And you can see this one definitely showing up as text over here in the layers and objects panel. This text looks a little funky because it's got a stroke on it. We can come down here to edit our fill color and stroke color. That's in the bottom left corner. So we go ahead and click stroke, and we can change the stroke to no fill. And now it's looking normal. We also have the same finer control over our text. So if we select our text here, we have things like line spacing, right? So you can go in and manually adjust that line spacing if you want to do that. You've got your text alignment tools over here, and some other kind of paragraph settings if you want to use those, as well as text size. So all of those tools are available to you up here in this top bar when you have your text selected. So the next thing we're going to talk about are path effects, and that's up here under path. So let's go ahead and select our text, and we'll come down to path and path effects, and this is going to open up a new window for us over here in this side panel. This side panel, by the way, is all of your open tools, so you can swap between them at any point. They don't close, they just kind of share this space up here. So if you want to close them, you can hit the little X, but I like kind of as I'm working just to keep them all open, because I'm going to definitely be using fill and stroke again. I'm going to definitely be looking at our objects, our layers and objects again. But over here, path effects is how we're going to do things like envelope warps and things like that. Notice we're still in text form over here, and I can't click this plus button. So in order to actually use path effects, we need to again expand this text. So we'll come back up to path, and we're going to do object to path, and that'll change that text object to paths. We can double check that over here in the layers and objects panel. So there are the paths that make up this text. And once that's done, now in this path effects window, we can actually hit the plus button, and it gives us a ton of different options, just a bunch of stuff that we can do with this text now. The one I really want to show you is the envelope deformation. This is one of those tools that is missing from Affinity Designer, and so we can go ahead and click that, and it gives you a lot of options down here. This looks really complicated, but really all we need to worry about are these little buttons right here. If we hover over it, it says edit on canvas, and that means that we're actually going to physically be able to manipulate it like visually, and I usually think that's the best way to go. So if we give ourselves a little more space down here, we can click the top bend path, and that's actually going to give us this bar right here, and we can go ahead and start manipulating that text, and we can use this to fill different shapes or arch text if we want to arch text. So the arch is pretty basic, so we'll go ahead and pull that up in the center there. And then we can grab the bottom bend path as well, and we can commit to the arch. So, you know, there's a lot of different things you can do. You can kind of go for that fish style. If you want to go for the fish style, you could bend the whole thing upwards. So, you know, like I said, there's a lot that you can do here, and you can mess with these envelope distortions for a long time. We could kind of go for like a wave. If we wanted to go for like a wave, we could do the top bend up there on the right, and then bend this one up here, you know, kind of something like that. If we need to, we can just grab this one. And this isn't the only path effect. There are a ton of different path effects that we can add. We can just hit the plus button and add another one. So a common one that gets used all of the time is the lattice deformation. So you can come in here and you can actually move these points individually to get the desired effect, the desired shapes, and you can just kind of come in and grab each of these little nodes, and you can get some interesting results here with those path effects. The last one I will show you guys really quick. We can come in here, we've got our text right there, and here you can see each of these letters is an individual object right now, because we duplicated the original set up here. If you need to be able to put a path effect on something like this, down here in the path effects tool, it says only one item can be selected. So it's telling us we can only do one of these letters at a time. The fix for this is really simple. We'll just come up to path and we're going to hit combine, and that's going to combine all of these paths into what Inkscape will see as one object. Now you can see our plus button is lit back up. We can click it, and the one we're going to add finally is perspective or envelope. And this one's really nice because this one actually allows you to move the perspective. So if you're looking at the text from like the side, or you're trying to put your text on like the side of a building or something like that, this is going to allow you to do that really easily. So with the perspective envelope path effect active, we can come into the node tool, and it's actually going to give us these nodes here. So we can go ahead and drag these up and down. And that instantly, I mean, the effect is very clear. You know, this has perspective now, which is awesome. And of course you can, you know, skew these however you need to skew them to get it to look natural if you're trying to make it look like it's laid out on a floor or something. Or I know Jimmy always puts logos on the back of trailers in photos that he's doing. So that's how you put the path effects on, and it's really, really useful for being able to handle a lot of these different situations. The last thing that I will warn you about is we need to kind of finalize these path effects once we apply them to our text. So the way you do that is the same way you get it from text to a path in the first place. So we'll just select the thing with the path effects on it, and we're going to come to path and object to path again. And now you'll see all of our path effects go away, and if we look in the layers and objects panel, the text that's selected here is back to just being normal paths, and that is ideal. That's what we want. And again, we can test this by double clicking it, and we can take a look here. We'll just control and scroll to zoom in, and you can see the E is outlined there because it is a standalone object. So we have to make sure that we do this when we're done applying path effects. If we don't do this, it's not going to import correctly. So same thing down here. If I select this now, you can see all of the nodes where the actual text is, not the effect that has been applied to it. So we'll come to path, and we're going to do object to path. And there we go. That's kind of finalized our changes for us. So that's path effects. And you can use this on any shape. This isn't just for text. Any object, any shape in Inkscape can be changed or customized with path effects. So very cool, very useful tool. If you guys have been watching the vector editing tutorials on the channel, then you know the next thing that is coming up is text on a circle, and it's a little bit different in Inkscape than it is in other pieces of software, so it's important to take some time to talk about that here. Really quick though, I do want to take a second, now that we have some objects on the page, to talk about transforming. So if we click and drag, we're going to move stuff around the page. If we hold Control and drag a corner, that's going to maintain our aspect ratio. That's really important for making sure that we're not distorting things. So Control is the one that I use the most. If we hold Shift, that's center out. So if you're trying to keep something in the same spot and just make it bigger or smaller, that's going to be the Shift key there. And of course, you can combine Shift and Control to make sure you maintain aspect ratio from center out. So very important. Also, we have the grab to move. So in other pieces of software, that's typically you're going to hit the space bar and then click and drag to move around the page. In Inkscape, it's just the space bar. So if you just hold the space bar down and move the mouse, that's going to move you around the page. You can also use the middle mouse button. So if you click the middle mouse button in, you can use that to pan around as well. So I just wanted to cover some of those basic controls. You're going to see me use them a lot as we move through this tutorial. Something else I want to take a look at really quick. The way that Inkscape handles paths and text groups is a little weird, so I like to keep it a little more tidy, and I'm going to show you how to deal with that really quick. So up here we've got just a bunch of loose paths that make up this laser everything up top, and if we want to just kind of seal the deal on these, we can come up to path and do a combine real quick, and that's going to just tell Inkscape that we want this to all be considered one thing, one path, one object. Now you can see we've only got the one path highlighted down here. That just kind of makes it a little easier to manage stuff over here. It may also help with exporting potentially, but that's kind of up in the air. We'll talk about exporting later, but we have a lot more paths that we need to deal with. So if we select this one down here, we can see this is just this laser everything right there. And then we've got the one that we did the envelope distort on, and this is in a grouped folder with a bunch of paths. We can do the same thing down here too. So we can select all of these, just come up to path and combine. Now we've got these 3 paths for these 3 blocks of text, and that just kind of keeps your layers panel you know, a little more tidy, a little easier to manage. We don't actually need these folders or groups either. We can simply pull these out just like this, and then we can get rid of these folders with the delete key on the keyboard, and that's just going to leave us with 3 nice paths. Now don't worry if you do need to come in and maybe separate these 2 words, or you need to edit this in some other way, and we need to break this back apart. It's actually really easy to do. We just select it, we can come up to path, and we can come down to split path, and that's going to split it back up into its individual pieces. What we don't want to do, I'll just undo that here. What we don't want to do is do path break apart, okay? Because what break apart's going to do is it's actually going to break apart every single individual piece, including the inside of letters that have like hollow insides, and that's really difficult to repair. So if you need to break something that you've combined back up, always use the path split path feature right here, and that's going to just break that up into individual letters. Then you can, you know, combine just like one word at a time. So we could do path combine, and we can over here as well path combine, and then we can use these 2 combined groups to you know, center things up or level things, rotate things, whatever. If we want to work on these independently, that's how you would handle that. Next up, we're going to briefly talk about text around a circle. So in order to do that, we have our circle tool right here, our ellipse tool. And we're going to click and drag, and we're going to hold control so we get a nice perfect circle there, and we're going to let it go. And once we have our circle, we're going to grab our text tool, and we're just going to type out the text. If we go ahead and start typing, we can just do some text. So maybe like laser everything. We'll just do laser everything, that's fine. We're going to grab our text now and hold shift and grab the circle, and then we're going to come up to text, and we're going to do put on path, and that's going to lock the text right onto the circle there. So from here we have to get this thing rotated, and rather than rotating the text, we're actually going to rotate the circle. And so we can just click the circle twice, and we get the little handlebars here to rotate that. And we just want to rotate it up so that it's about center. If you want to get it perfect, the best way to get it perfect is to come up here and grab a guide and just drag it down and get it to touch one of the sides of the text. And then you can just pull it to even it out between the 2. If you want, you can continue to adjust this by bringing it just a little bit closer and then making further adjustments right until you get it in the sweet spot there. When you're done, you can select the guide and hit the delete key on your keyboard, and that'll go away. You can also edit the text after putting it up here. So if you want to change anything, we can double click and edit on the fly. So maybe we'll add LLC to the end of this. Let's do caps LLC. And yeah, I mean, that looks pretty good. And you know what? I don't love the capitals up here, so we can change that too. Everything. Great. LLC. So that looks perfect. And then the last thing we need to do, if we delete this circle right now, we're going to lose our curve on our text. So what we need to do is actually expand this text as well, just like we've done with everything else so far. So we're going to come into path and object to path. And now, just like before, this is its own object. So if we delete the circle, everything's going to be right where we left it. So they're independent now because we expanded this text object to a path. That does mean that this text isn't editable anymore, but it does preserve this if we want to get rid of the circle. We're not quite done with the circle yet, so we're going to leave it here. If you want a clearer picture about how text that dips below the line is looking too, we don't need to leave this a solid black circle. There's no need for that. So if you select it, we can come back up to our fill and stroke here. Remember, we got to that down here in the bottom left corner. And we can set our fill to no fill, and then we can just add a minimal stroke just so that we can see the outline, and it's a lot easier to work with that way. But what if we want text on the inside going the other way? Well, that's actually pretty easy too. Since our text is going to be running along the inside of the circle, we want to make sure that it's in line with our outer text. So we'll just grab the circle here, and remember we're going to use Shift and Control so that we're center out and we maintain our aspect ratio. And we're just going to pull that circle out until it's touching the tops of the lettering that we have running along the outside edge. So there we go, we've got our new circle. And then all we need to do is again grab our text tool. We're going to type some new text, so maybe like established 2019. I think that sounds pretty good. And you'll notice here we've got the stroke, right, and the fill set backwards, and that's just because we had just changed it for the circle. So with our text selected here, we can come back into the fill and stroke, and we're just going to set it to no stroke and a solid fill, and that'll fix that up for us. So here's our text, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to grab the text, and then we're going to Shift and select the circle. We're going to come to text, and we're going to do put on path, and that's going to throw it back up there. What we need to do now is, I mean, if we have any editing to do, we can do that. So you know, maybe we want to make this just slightly smaller, maybe 6-point font, and maybe we want to add some text because it looks pretty short. So you know, we could say everything laser on YouTube with a couple extra spaces so that we can put something pretty in there. Established 2019. I think that looks better. And then same thing here, guys. We're not going to rotate the text. We're actually going to grab the circle, and we're going to rotate that all the way around. And then if we want to move this to the inside of the circle, all we need to do is use our mirror functionality, the flip functionality up here. If we click that, it's actually going to be along the inside of the circle, which I guess we have to rotate again. No big deal. We'll just go ahead and bring that back down just like that. And finally, if we want to make sure this is absolutely center, again, we're just going to grab the guide, we'll bring it down, we'll get it as close to one of the sides as possible, and then we're just going to rotate this until they're the same distance away from the line. And again, we can adjust the guide as needed. So that looks really good to me right there. And last but not least, we're just going to select the text. We're going to do path, object to path, to free that from the circle. And then at this point, you know, we can do whatever we want with the circle. We can make it a little bigger and use it as, you know, some kind of decorative piece, or make it smaller and do a design in there, or we can just delete it altogether. We don't actually need it. We don't need the guide any longer either. Now we can start putting kind of like some flourishy stuff in if that's something that we wanted to do. And actually, you know what, we'll keep the circle for that because that'll help us with placement. So if we select the circle, Shift and Control so that we're center out, right? And here we can see things are actually lining up quite nicely. So if we get this right along the bottom of the larger text, and then the smaller text isn't quite touching, but that's okay because it is smaller text. And then we'll just come in if we want to do like our little flourishes like we have been doing. Again, Control, so we get like a nice clean ellipse. Something like that looks good. And then we can move it into position. And we're just touching our guideline here. And then we can do Control D, which will duplicate. That'll make us a copy. And we can drag it out. And if we hold Control, that locks it to the axis right there. So we can bring that one over and just kind of like let that sit, just barely touching the line, so we know that those two are parallel. And finally, if we want maybe just like a little thing going on down here, that's no problem. We can come in, grab our text tool, maybe do like a little tilde or something. Let's see if I can get one that looks good. And we can click this. We'll give it just a little bit of a rotation so that it looks about what it needs to look like, and we'll just drop that in place right there. So there it is, guys. I mean, that's the circle text. We did it. We're done. That's looking really, really good. I thought our circular logo looked a little empty, so I brought in the Laser Everything logo just so we could drop that in the middle. It's a good chance to show you guys the align tools real quick. So if we select our logo and we select the circle, all we need to do is come up to Object, and then we can come to Align and Distribute, and that's going to open a new tab up here in our Options tab. So we have the layers, we have the fill, we have our path effects. These are all things we've opened, and now the Align and Distribute is open up here as well. And same thing as always, center and center. We just want to make sure relative to and then last selected, because we don't want our circle to go anywhere. That was the last thing we picked, so I'll show you one more time. We're picking the Laser Everything logo first, holding shift, and then picking the circle last. So this will be what we are referencing when we're centering up the logo. Now we can click center and center, and the logo will move right to the center. We can go ahead and finally delete this circle. I think we're actually done with it now. So we can hold control and shift here and grab the corner and just pull out. And that's looking really fresh. That looks pretty nice actually. Because the text on the bottom is a little smaller, it does feel a little further away than it feels on the top. So if you want to, you could use the arrow keys and just knock that down a touch. I think that looks pretty nice overall. It's good enough for today's demonstration anyway. So now we're going to take our first look at Boolean operations by negating this graphic here. So if we wanted the opposite of this for maybe like a coin or something, we would want to negate this so that the text and the logo were rising up out of the metal instead of being engraved. Pretty easy to do. So we're going to grab another ellipse. We're going to hold control again, and we're going to pull that down just so that it's a little bit bigger than what we've got over here that we're working with. And we're going to, let's make a copy. So I'm going to control D to duplicate, because I do like this and I don't want to lose it if something goes wrong. So again, control, I'm just going to make that a little smaller, and we'll just put this over here for safekeeping. We'll grab the new one, and let's set this new one to white. We're going to want to see it on top of our circle over here. And remember, this is why we kind of set that page color to an off-white in the very beginning, because now we can actually see this. We can see what we're working with. And you don't want to do this, but just hang with me for a second here. I'm going to control G. That'll group this. So this will be grouped together, okay? And we're going to center this up. So again, we're selecting the logo. We're selecting our circle. We still have Align and Distribute open. We're going to do center, center. And then we need to send this circle to the back so we can see our white text on top. So I'm going to come down up here to lower selection to bottom, and now that's in the back. So we've got things kind of set up the way that we need to in order to perform our first Boolean operation to cut this out, kind of cookie cutter style. What we need to do is come up to path, and our Boolean operations are here. We have union, difference, intersection, exclusion, division. And so those are the main ones, and the one that we want is exclusion. And if I click this, nothing is going to happen, and we get a little error down here. One of the objects is not a path, cannot perform Boolean operation. And the reason for that is because this white bit here is actually a group. We've got all of these different paths inside of this group, and that's no good. So we actually can't perform Boolean operations on groups in Inkscape. That's something we can do in Illustrator, but we cannot do it in Inkscape. So we're going to pull this out. We need to clean this up. We have not been very responsible with how we are handling all of the assets here, and this is one of the downsides of Inkscape, is that you need to be a little more particular with caring for this kind of stuff. So let's ungroup this, Control Shift G. And let's inspect these elements and kind of see what's causing us problems here. If we look over here, the Layers tab, this is just so useful for us because it's going to show us exactly where the problems are. We've got a lot of stuff going on. We've got two text folders. We've got a bunch of paths with different names. We have a piece of text still. We never expanded our little tilde there, so that's a problem. And then we've got this new path, which is our logo. We have our circles. There's just a bunch of stuff. We need to get this all cleaned up fairly quickly. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select these and just make sure they're all individual paths. So here we have our logo, and if you double click, you can actually rename these to keep track of them a little better. So we've got logo. Up here we've got our top text, and let's find that highlighted down here. So here it is in the folder, text. So what we're going to do, just like we did last time, we're going to select all of this, and then we're going to come to path and combine, right? And that's going to combine that. So we'll call this bit of text here, let's double click, and we'll just call this LLC, just so we can keep track of things, because there's a lot of stuff on the page now. These two are our circles right here. So we've got one circle there, another here. These can be combined, so we can actually path and combine, and we can call these decor circle. All right, we're just moving along here. We've accidentally clicked the 0 in this bit of text, so this whole bit down here, this is all of that text that's made up the everything laser on YouTube established 2019. That's all of this right here. So with this, we can actually combine this, and we can also combine it with our tilde, but we have to expand that first. So we've got all our paths here. Let's go to Path, Combine, and we'll call this Established. Okay. So now you can see things are shaping up fairly quickly here. Here's that text asset right here, and this text is that tilde. So we need to path, object to path, and then our tilde is here. So we can call this tilde. And let's see, I think that's everything. So everything should now be its own little kind of path group. This stuff up here is from our copy that we've saved. And if we don't want to pay attention to this, we can actually group this into a folder, and we can name this backup logo. So now we know that everything in this folder is part of the backup logo. We don't need to pay attention to that. So back to the main thing over here. So we've got our logo, we've got our tilde, we've got our decoration circles, we've got our established text, and we've got our LLC text. Now, what we can do is we can actually combine all of these things together. I prefer to pull them out of their folders, so I'm just going to bring that up to the tippy top up here, out of the backup logo folder. We don't want to put it in there by accident. We've got our tilde here, so let's move our tilde up. We've got our decor circles. We've got our established right there. And then these text folders are all empty. We can't drop them down, so they're all empty, so we can get rid of those. And this last circle over here is just the circle we're using for negating, so that's fine on its own. So logo, tilde, decor circles, and the established date. We're missing our LLC text. Oh, and our LLC text is right down here. So all of these things are actually still in this backup logo folder. So let's go ahead and move those out. We'll just bring that down to the bottom. Perfect. We can close this up so that we don't have to pay attention to it. So we've got our LLC, logo, tilde, decor circles, and established. And now we can take all of these and we'll do path and combine. We're not making any more changes to this. So having this in one path called LLC, really probably the best way to deal with this, just so that it doesn't cause problems for us when we're trying to do our Booleans. Again, this is much easier in something like Illustrator, because essentially when we group things, it's combining the paths for us. So you can perform Boolean operations on grouped paths in Illustrator. We can't do that in Inkscape. So that's why this kind of management over here is really important, okay? So here we finally got our combined LLC. We can set this back to white. We're going to shift onto the circle, and we're going to align again. So let's come back over to our align and distribute, and we'll center. We're going to move this circle to the end again, to the back. So lower selection to bottom. And now we're ready to perform our Boolean operation. And I'm actually going to do it kind of off the page here a little bit, because I want you guys to see the effect. So we're going to select both. We've got our combined paths for our logo selected, and we've got our circle selected. And we're going to come up to path once again, and this time we're going to click exclusion. And this is going to chop out anything on top from the bottommost piece. So there you go. You can see it's totally transparent. This is nice if you put in the effort, because you actually don't have any double lines here that you need to deal with. Everything is really kind of just done for you, and exclusion is a really nice tool. So that's our first Boolean operation, and that allowed us to make this really nice negative image with our logo. So here we've got our backup logo folder that we kind of grouped together. So we've got the inverted now, and we've got the regular version. Let's just take a second. We're going to ungroup this, Control-Shift-G, and let's prep this for export too, because we are going to export both of these, and we don't want any trouble with any of this stuff being forgotten. So the first thing we need to do, we've got that tilde down there. One more time. Let's do this. We'll do it together one more time, a little bit faster here. So we need to object to path on that tilde to make it a path. We've got our logo here. Here we've got our decor circles. Here we've got our established text, so we can grab all of those paths for the established text. We're going to come to path and combine. And then here we've got our LLC text. So we're going to grab this path, shift click, and we're going to do path, and we're going to do combine. So now we've got all of these individual elements here, and we can bring them out of their folders if we want to. I think we can even just grab all of them like this. No problem, just like that. And then we can come to path and combine. And yes, that does in fact work. It pulls all of those assets out of their individual folders, so we can delete those folders. And now we've got our normal non-inverted version ready to export as well. The same rules apply here, guys. So if we need to move or change something with this, the combine is not super permanent. We can just come back up to path and we can do split path again, and that is going to break it into its individual components. So you can always come in and make changes to this if you need to, but I find combining them is the best way to have them prepped for export, and it really allows you to keep your layers panel over here nice and organized. So let's go ahead and just recombine that one more time, and this is really nice to look at now, and we could go through and name all of these things as well so that we know what exactly is on our page, and where we can find it in the layers panel if we need to make changes. In fact, I might just do that really quick. All right, so quick snap of the fingers there, and I've got these all labeled. Remember, double click in order to take care of that. And from here, we're in really good shape. We've got everything in layer 1. It's all labeled. It's all combined appropriately. So this is a really pro piece of artwork right now. This is going to be super laser friendly for us. Now that this is done, let's talk about some of the other Boolean operations, just in case we want to use those for anything. So we go over these in some of the other pieces of software. We'll talk about them really quick in this episode as well. It's not really a big deal. So if we have two shapes, it doesn't matter what shapes they are, just any two shapes, and we need to export them. We want them to look like this. Let's actually go ahead and set those to black just so they're a little easier to see. I talk about this a lot on the channel, guys, but we can't have overlap, okay? Laser software does not like overlapping objects. So we need to combine them, and that's going to be path and union, okay? So we'll go ahead and hit union here, and boom, it's welded into one shape, ready to go. There are a lot of other things that we can do with those Boolean operations as well. So if I just set these back to black again, I undid a little too far. We can come up to path, and let's look at difference. So difference leaves whichever one is on the bottom. So here, this was the one on the bottom, so the top vector was removed, and we have a nice little cutout there now. We can also take a look at exclusion. So exclusion is that every other. It's kind of like XOR in Affinity Designer. So this one is filled, that one is empty, this one is filled, right? So it's kind of like that hopscotch version of Boolean there. And then we've got division. So if we go ahead and use division, that's going to cut this middle piece and this bottom piece into two parts, and we lose the rest of what's going on over here. Division's a little weird in how it works. I don't really have a good way to explain it, but definitely experiment with it because it's going to really be helpful, especially when you're trying to get two little nubs out of something a little bit larger. Division can be a big help. So in classic Laser Everything style, let's create two ellipses here, and we'll do the moon trick real quick. Okay, so we've got our two circles. We're going to line them up over one another, and we're trying to build our moon, and we can't really see which one is going to give us the moon cutout, what the moon cutout's going to look like. So Inkscape doesn't give us bounding boxes that actually hug the outline of the shape. They're always rectangles, which is one of my biggest pet peeves about this software. But there's a pretty easy solution. It's kind of a workaround. We can come up to view, and we can go to display mode and just do outlines, and then we can actually see those intersection points and the overlapping areas. So if we want a moon, right, we can make a moon just about whatever shape we want, just like that. That looks perfect. And with that done, we can come to path, and here we'll just go ahead and do division, and that's going to give us our little moon slice right there. And we can always come back to view, display mode, and normal again to see the pieces that we've left behind. So we actually don't need that anymore. We've got our moon, so super duper easy. And as you guys know, I like to make that little logo, so we will do Control D to duplicate, and we can pull that copy out. We can do our mirror, so remember, you can always mirror, and then we can pull the copy back in to where it gives us that little shape. And I'm using Control here to make sure these stay aligned, but I seem to have messed it up a little bit, so no worries. We can just select both of those. We'll come up to our align and distribute, and we can just align to top. Very easy. And then remember, we don't want overlaps. We've got quite a bit of overlap over here. So let's go ahead and come back to our Boolean operations under path and union, and boom, we're left with one path. Very simple to do. So Boolean operations, best friend when you're working with vectors, guys. You should learn your Boolean operations. They work a little bit differently in every piece of software. Inkscapes are a little trickier to use than usual, but still definitely gets the job done. Absolutely. Okay, guys, so we're going to work on our little plaque project next. If you've watched the other art tutorials, you know what I'm talking about. So we're just dragging this box down here, and we'll go ahead and set this to a black fill. And let's just check our stroke here, make sure that we don't have a stroke applied. So there's a few ways that we can adjust the corners on this, right? We don't just want like a normal rectangle. We want some fancy corners. So we can either grab the node tool, and this little circle right here will allow us to change our curves, and we can control both axes independently, or we can control them both together. And we're going to do that by holding control down and then moving the node. This is really great for simple corners, but if we want to get a little more advanced, we're going to move into our path effects, which is up here somewhere. It's this one right here, path effects. So in order to do this, for the best results, we really want to convert this rectangle into a path. So we're going to do path, object to path, just like we've been doing on everything else, and our little plus button lights up so we can click it. So let's go ahead and click that. And this is the one we're looking for right here, corners, fillet, and chamfer, right? So we'll hit the check, it will add it, and now we've got some controls down here. You can adjust the size of the corners in any unit that you'd like. We'll do inches for now, but millimeters, pixels, whatever you want to do. I typically leave the method on auto, and then this little radius in percent here, I would just want to warn you about this. I don't know why, I don't understand why. Maybe someone can explain it in the comments, but if we check this radius in percent and we start rounding the corners, they actually don't round evenly. So you can see the top left and bottom right have less of a curve than the top right and bottom left. I don't know why that is, but if we come in here and we just set this back to 0 and we uncheck that box so that we're using our units field here instead, and we round those corners out, they all round equally. So weird thing, just thought I'd point that out. If anybody knows why, you can leave a comment down below. We're going to skip chamfer steps for now, and I just want to show you what some of our options are for these corners. They're not just rounded, we have a few different options here. So the one you're looking at right now is called fillet, and then we also have the inverse fillet, which is kind of like our fancy plaque notched corners there. We also have the chamfer, which is that straight edge, and then we have what's called inverse chamfer. Chamfer and inverse chamfer don't really look different, and that's because our chamfer steps are set to 1. The steps are how many straight lines it takes to complete a curve. So here we have a straight edge, and then we have one step and then another straight edge. If we up this to 2, you can see we have a straight edge and then 1, 2 steps and then another straight edge. So that's what chamfer steps does. So you can go up higher and higher and higher here till essentially you're back to rounded corners. So you don't want to go too hard on that, but it can make some neat things, and this is where we really see the difference between the chamfer and the inverse chamfer. So you're looking at the regular chamfer here, you can see the angle points outwards, and if we go to inverse chamfer, the angle points inwards. So that's the difference. You can continue to add steps just like you can with the normal chamfer on the inverse. But I think I like inverse fillet for this project. This radius is huge, that looks ridiculous. So we'll go ahead and tone that down just a little bit. I think something like this looks pretty good. And from here, we have one last thing to do, just like we did with the text. If we want to confirm these changes with our path effects here, we have to go to path, object to path. And once we do that, we'll see our path effect list is empty, which means we've confirmed this shape, and we can check our layers and objects panel here just to see that that's true. So if I deselect it and we click it again, we've got just the one rectangle there. This is a really important step, this object to path step. Notice over here, this one at the beginning of the episode was all like wiggly and funky because we used our envelope distort on it, and I didn't save it. And it reverted at some point during the episode. I'm just noticing now, looking over at it. It did not save, which is not what we want, right? So again, I'll just show you really quick. We'll just come in here. Let's just redo that work super quick. Where is it? We did the perspective one and we saved that one. We want not lattice deformation, but envelope deformation. Here we go. So now we can, you know, kind of reproduce what we had done to this one initially. And then we skipped a vital step. What we didn't do here is we did not convert this to a path. So the last step here would have been path, object to path. And that saves that the way that we need it. We can check it over here, laser everything, just one path, no weird groups or anything. So now this is ready to go. And again, we can double check that by double clicking it. We can see all the nodes. Everything is nice and permanent. So I just want to really harp on that. That's an important step. We could lose these corners if we don't object to path our rectangle. So now we need to add some mounting holes, and mounting holes are pretty easy to do. Again, we can either make an ellipse here, right? And we can set these to white so that we can see them. So if I just click down here on white and we bring this over, right, then we can see that there. Or again, we could come to view, display mode, outline, just so that we know exactly where these are going. However you want to handle that, it's totally up to you. But we'll just put our couple mounting holes in here really quick. So I'm going to Control D to duplicate, and then we're going to hold Control to pull this out and across. And then we're going to select both, Control D to duplicate, and we're going to hold Control and drag that one down to the bottom of the plaque. Just like that. And then the last step here, or second to last rather, is we're going to select all four, because remember, we can't group these, right? These cannot be grouped, or we will not be able to perform our Boolean to stamp these out of our plaque. So instead, we're going to come to Path, and we're going to go to Combine, and just make sure those are nice and combined. And then we're going to Shift and select our plaque. We're kind of combining all of the skills that we've learned so far here. We're going to align, so we'll align center, just with that align tab. And then once that's done, we're ready to perform our Boolean. So we can switch our view back to normal, just to make sure that this works the way we want. We'll select the entire thing. We're going to come to Path, and we're going to use the exclusion Boolean. And there we go. So that's punched out now. We can drag it down here into the gray to see that it is in fact transparent. So that's looking perfect. Last but not least, if we want to be able to drop things in here, these are going to be cut lines, right? We don't want to mark this. We can go ahead and just do our fill and stroke. So fill we'll set to nothing, stroke we'll set to black, and there we have it. So it's one nice clean path. It's going to import super well. We've got our mounting holes in there. It's ready to go. All right, guys, so next up we're going to be talking about image trace, and I know we've talked about this before. We've talked about it in the Affinity Designer tutorial, actually, because Affinity Designer doesn't have image trace, so we actually had to use Inkscape in that tutorial to trace our image. But we're going to talk about it again because this is the Inkscape tutorial, and if you have a really simple logo, you know, something without a lot of detail, you can simply paste it in. So we'll go ahead and paste that in right here. Here's our company logo, right? Company name, very basic. This kind of stuff we can just trace right here in Inkscape. We don't need to do any prep for it at all. So if I right click this, we'll see trace bitmap. That's what we're looking for. So we'll go ahead and click that. And it brings up the basic trace panel over here. You guys are used to this threshold. You can turn the threshold up or down to get the parts of the image that you actually want traced. You get a nice little preview window down here. You can go ahead and pull this out if you want to get a nice big view of it. Don't worry about this pixelation. That'll actually be smoothed out when it actually does the trace. This is just a preview. There's also a few different modes up here. So we can use edge detection, so it'll actually detect the edge. We could do color quantization if we have a bunch of different colors going on. We also have center line tracing, so it'll actually go through and trace the center of these lines, so we can add our own stroke and thickness. But for now, we just want to deal with brightness cutoff. That's usually the best option. And once we have the threshold set where we want it, we can hit apply, and then we'll pull this back out of the way. And over here, we now have the original bitmap and the logo sitting on top of it. So we can move the bitmap out of the way, and you can actually see that there. There you go. And delete it, and we're left with our logo. So that's a great way to do really simple logos that don't have a lot going on, or logos where we have a sufficient image size. That, however, is not always going to be the case. Sometimes we'll have logos like this, and when we get something like this from a company to engrave on their products, doing a simple trace isn't going to work out super well for us. I mean, this looks okay. It's not the worst, but it's certainly not the best. We'll just go ahead and apply this through just for kicks over here. So again, you know, it's not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it's certainly not the best. This text down here, brewing, is kind of rough. We're losing a lot of detail in the barrel, in the leaves, in the bridge. So I think we can do better than this, and I'm going to kind of talk you through how to do that really fast. What we need to do is upscale this image so that Inkscape has more pixels to work with while it's tracing. That's easy enough to do. Normally I would do this in Photoshop, and in the Illustrator tutorial we do it in Photoshop, but for this one, since we're talking open source software, we're talking free, I've actually gone ahead and installed GIMP, and GIMP is basically the open source alternative for Photoshop. So we'll give this a second to load up here. There it is, and we should be able to create a new file. So we'll do File, New. And we'll just have like kind of a standard template here. We'll hit OK, and we can go ahead and scroll and zoom out, and we want to paste our graphic into here. So there's not a lot of super complex stuff going on in here. Once we get our image dropped into GIMP, what we want to do is use the crop tool, and we actually want to just crop right into that logo. We don't want to leave anything out, so make sure that you give a fair amount of space on all sides of this. Doesn't have to be perfectly even because we are, you know, tracing this, so we're just going to end up with the vector anyway, but just try to get just the part of the logo you actually want. We don't need to deal with all this stuff out here. Once we have that, it's time to upscale. So we're going to come into Image, and we're going to go to Scale Image, and this is how we're going to upscale this thing. Now, right now we have a resolution of 300 by 300. That's fair, but 600 is typically better, so we'll go ahead and type 600 in the X. Since our lock is checked, it's going to automatically scale the Y, and that's going to give us twice as many pixels to work with, so that's really going to help. In fact, it's going to give us 4 times as many pixels to work with. So we're going to be adding a lot of pixels here, but our image size should also be increased. If the image size is too small, Inkscape's not going to do a great job tracing it. So let's go ahead and bump this up. Somewhere around 2000 is going to be good. Again, we have our lock on, so this height is automatically going to adjust for us, and that looks perfect. And we can hit scale. It's warning us that this is going to be massive. That's okay. That's what we want. So we'll hit scale. It's going to take a second to load. And there we go. So now it's much bigger. We've got a lot more pixels to work with here. The last thing we're going to do is a threshold. And you guys remember this from the Photoshop tutorial if you follow along with the channel. It's pretty easy to take care of. So all we have to do to perform this threshold is come up to colors, and it's right down here in this bottom chunk of the menu, threshold, and we'll hit OK. And this is where it's going to break it up into just black or white. And this is kind of like our tracing slider. So this is a preview of what our trace is going to look like. And we can go ahead and adjust the slider until we get the detail that we want to get. So we obviously don't want to turn it up so high that we blow out the bridge and our font down here. But we don't want to really crank it too low either, or we're gonna, you know, have like kind of a staticky image. This is a particularly difficult one to deal with too, because it does have kind of that wear and tear on it as a logo. But I think this looks really good, so we can hit OK. If we really wanted to, we could come in here with the paintbrush, and we could actually paintbrush some of that wear and tear away just to make it look nicer. And this will take a while, but you know, again, I'm kind of assuming here, guys, that this is like, you know, our worst case scenario. Hopefully people aren't bringing us graphics like this very often, so we shouldn't have to deal with things this horrible on a regular basis. But you know, you could spend the time if you wanted to just painting in some of that wear and tear to really clean this up. And you can get as into this as you want. The main thing that you want to focus on while you're working on this is just that we aren't losing any legibility, right? So this is actually the one thing that I think has maybe been just overexposed a little bit, or rather underexposed, is this brewing text here. So we can actually come in with a really fine brush and just kind of clean some of that up, because our trace is going to get that. And while it's going to be pretty small on the final logo, it would be nice to kind of save some of that detail in there just to add a little bit of legibility. And again, I'm not going to go super crazy in here, but I'm just going to add just a little bit of that legibility back, and then we can go ahead and get on with our trace. So here is our kind of cleaned up graphic, and we can go ahead and save this. So let's go File, Export. And we can pick a file type. So we just like a JPEG would be fine, or a PNG, just a standard image type. JPEG will do for now. And let's go ahead and save this somewhere we're not going to lose it. The desktop, it seems like it would be a good choice. We can call this River Brew, and we'll go ahead and export it. We'll turn that quality slider all the way up. We want to get as much data out of those pixels as possible, and then we can export. And with that done, we're finished with GIMP. We can go ahead and close it. We'll discard our changes, and we'll move this over here just because it would make a nice reference with our blown up version of the logo. So let's just move that over for a second. You can either come to File, Open, or we can import. And we'll go to the desktop and we'll find our riverbrew.jpg, and we'll hit Open, and we'll hit OK. And there is our improved file. So this one, we've really spent a lot of time cleaning up those details and bringing out a lot of that extra stuff that's maybe gotten lost in the original trace. So once that's done, we can compare. We'll go ahead and trace bitmap here, and we'll just make sure that looks good. Note, we don't really need to make any adjustments because we did all of this hard work in GIMP, so it's already done for us. We can hit apply, and then over here we'll right click and we'll trace bitmap. And we can adjust this if we want to, but I don't know how good we're going to be able to get it, and that looks fine. So we'll hit apply, and finally we'll get rid of the raster images behind our logos, and there you can really read the brewing, right? That looks so much better. Over here it's a lot worse. We've gotten rid of all of these big chunks missing from the letters in here. I feel like you can see the trees and the bridge a little bit better. I feel like you can see the barrel a little bit better, but really it was all about those little words right there, and we really did a great job cleaning that up. So we can go ahead and get rid of this, and we've got our successful image trace right here. So with that done, the last thing to do, really, we'll resize this. Don't forget to hold Control to keep your scale. The last thing we have to do is really just take a look at our layers panel over here. Everything's an individual path still, so we're still doing really well. We can rename these if we want. We'll call this one Brew. This one over here we can call Company. And we've got our plaque. And what are you? We've got our logo. So this is great, guys. We've gotten most of the stuff done that we needed to get done today. We did the GIMP trace prep, we did the Inkscape image trace, and I think that's all I wanted to cover in software, guys. So hopefully that helped you use Inkscape. Now let's just briefly chat about how to actually get this into software. It's much easier to get things into Lightburn than it is into Ezcad. So we're going to do Lightburn first. We're just going to come up to File. We're going to go to Export, and Export's going to open in this same window up here where everything else is opened. And you can either do Document, so that'll give you the whole 5x3, or you can do Page. Either way, whatever you want to do. You could also do Selection, so if you just select everything on the page that you want to export, you can select it all. And we can do Selection, and it's just going to export the stuff that we selected. Then we're going to set a path, so we'll go ahead and set a path here. Again, to the desktop is probably fine. We'll give it a name, so we can name this, Ink Test 1, and we'll hit Save. And that's actually going to save this as a PNG because I didn't select the drop down here. We want this to be SVG, so let's make sure we select SVG there. Ink Test 1. It's going to the desktop where we selected, and we can hit Export. And once that's done, we can go ahead and open up Lightburn here. That's just going to take just a second. And once we're in Lightburn, we can go to Import, and we're going to select Ink Test 1 and hit open. And there it is, guys. That's everything. So, just to show you, we can go ahead and select all this stuff here, and we can set it to fill, and everything fills perfectly. All of the little details in our trace logo are there, so no problem with Lightburn whatsoever. Ezcad is going to be a little more difficult though. And within Ezcad, we'll go ahead and import a vector, and we'll scroll down to Ink Test 2 and hit open. And what's going to happen is everything looks fine for the most part, except for some reason, the way that Ezcad handles circles, it just doesn't agree with Inkscape. And I've changed just about every setting that I could think to change in Inkscape in order to get these curves to come out right. You'll notice it's a problem over here as well. It just doesn't work out. And if we tried to hatch this, just to show you, things really kind of go south here. It's not looking good, right? So that's okay. This is easy enough to work around. I've spent a really long time on this episode trying to find out how to get this to import, and sometimes the simplest answer is the easiest one. So let's talk about that. So we know that Ezcad doesn't like Inkscape SVGs, and we know that Ezcad loves Adobe version 8 Illustrator files. Unfortunately, Inkscape can't export to Adobe AI files, but it can save to another Adobe format. So if we come down, we can do Save As, and we're going to drop this list down here, and what we're looking for is encapsulated PostScript or .eps. This is basically a non-proprietary vector file format created by Adobe. It's very similar to AI. So what we're going to do is we're going to save this EPS file right here. We'll go ahead and save that to the desktop. We can give this a name, so we'll just give this inktest.eps, and we'll hit save. And we're just going to leave all of this the same and hit OK. And then what we're going to do is we're actually going to pull up this website right here. And there's a dozen websites that do exactly this. This is just the one that I've been using. I'll leave a link in the description, but you could use anything that will convert an EPS to an SVG. And all we need to do is just choose from files. We're going to find our inktest.eps file and hit open. And we're going to hit convert, and we're just going to convert this EPS to an SVG. And for whatever reason, Ezcad is not going to have a problem accepting this SVG. So we'll click download, and that's going to download to our downloads folder right there. And we can open Ezcad, and we'll go to import, and we're going to select our downloads folder, and there it is, inktest.svg, and we can hit open, and everything is going to import perfectly. So all of our circles are intact, all of our vectors are ready to go. If we ungroup this here, again, you can see that all of our curves are intact. Everything looks great. We can go ahead and start grouping things and hatching them. So we can group and hatch, and we'll hit OK. And we're not going to have any problems hatching anything that we've imported via this method. So it is a little bit of a workaround, but you guys out there that use Inkscape know how big of a pain in the butt exporting from Inkscape for Ezcad can be, and I've found that this is absolutely a great workaround. So if you're having trouble, consider exporting as an EPS first, and then converting that EPS into an SVG file, and you're going to be able to import that right into Ezcad without any problems whatsoever. Alright guys, so that is Inkscape. Hopefully you got something out of this episode. I know that Inkscape can feel really challenging, especially the first time you open it. I mean, if you think Adobe Illustrator has a steep learning curve, like, you haven't opened Inkscape. It can be really tough, but hopefully this guide got you pointed in the right direction, especially with those export instructions at the end. If you're an Ezcad user, that just took so much out of me trying to find a working solution. And I think the workaround that we ended up coming up with is really elegant, and it performs really, really well when we're testing it in Ezcad. So hopefully, if you don't have the budget for Illustrator or you need more features than Affinity Designer can offer, Inkscape is going to be the right choice for you. It's got a ton of features that we didn't cover in today's episode, and hopefully we can go over those down the road and start doing a little more kind of like artwork oriented stuff going forward. I know you guys really enjoy that kind of content, so it's definitely something I'm keeping an eye out on. But If you got value out of today's episode, don't forget to smash the like button. Let everybody else know that the content is good. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get notified the next time I upload a video. If you love the channel, it's the best thing that ever happened to you. Don't forget to sign up for the Laser Master Academy. It's the #1 way to support the channel, make sure that we can continue doing the show. You get a bunch of bonus goodies for signing up, like access to our laser parameter libraries, bonus episodes of the podcast, and bonus live streams. And seriously, none of the information that we make available for free publicly on our YouTube channel would be here at all if it weren't for our LMA members. So if you know one, thank them, and if you want to be one, you can sign up right now. It's over at masters.lasereverything.net. Special shout out to everybody who's made the show possible so far, and I hope more of you can join us in the future. That's all I've got, guys. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Laser Everything, and we will see you in the next one.